Thanks, Anika. And I'll just say a welcome to you and thank you very much for taking on this workshop, Building a Narrative Around the Benefits and Challenges of Community Agriculture, which is fascinating. And yes, so I'll hand over to you, Anika, to introduce yourself and any more of the ground rules. But please put into the chat your name and location would help, and use the chat for questions as well. Anyway, thank you very much, Anika. Over to you.
Okay, great. I'm seeing how I can go full screen here. Maybe this is better view. Okay, are we seeing full screen now?
Not quite.
No. 1 second. View. Okay. Is that better or?
We still see your slides down the side.
Okay. Let's see. There, maybe this is better. Is that better?
Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, thank you everyone for joining. And thank you very much to Ian and the Schumacher Institute for holding this space, allowing me to present on this topic. As Ian mentioned, please feel free to drop in the chat your name, your location, any other details you want to share. I want to preface this whole experience with saying I've kind of designed a presentation that I visualize being highly interactive, but given the limitations of an online session, I think we're set at, we can go over an hour, but I know that some people might not be able to stay for that hour plus. I might skip around a little bit. I'm very visual heavy, and I hope you also enjoy this approach, which is going to be very much a storytelling approach and a kind of finding my way approach to the topic of community agriculture. Additionally, we have, I believe, probably some really great range of expertise in the room of some people probably who've been working with community agriculture for years, if not decades. And I am very much about learning from people established in the field as well as people new to the field. So if you are engaged with this topic, again, please feel free to drop that in the chat. If you have webinars of your own, organizations, activities of your own, please feel free to leave it in the chat so that we can have that whole ecosystem of exchange flowing among all the participants. Okay, so there we go. So how this all came about that we are sitting here today is in large part because of this book, The Schumacher Briefing, Creating Sustainable Cities by Herbert Girardet. It is what led me to reaching out to the Schumacher Institute several years ago and meeting Ian, and then myself becoming a Schumacher Fellow. This is one of my favorite books. I highly recommend it. And I had to begin this session with this quote: food growing should be regarded as an important component of future urban living, from this book. This is probably at one of the central thesis of my own approach to food growing in the cities. Okay, forward, there we go. And so here we are. The first flyer that was used for this, I believe, was called Building Narrative and Community Agriculture. And then this one was also used, Walkability and Community Agriculture. And I think we could also have called this session Building Momentum and Media around issues of community agriculture, because that is, I would say, at the beating heart of my approach with this is the idea of narrative and media to build momentum around issues of community agriculture. So I'm not going to read all of this text, but here was from, if you're subscribed to the Schumacher Institute newsletter, this was featured in there. So I'll read the second part here. My approach to this topic focuses on both the benefits and challenges of supporting community and urban agriculture and how this activity can help to shape local food access, food literacy, and resilience. So when you see this watering can, it means it's time to engage. And unfortunately, we don't have time to do live roundtables, but I think we can have some space for discussion at the end and we can come back to some of these questions. In the survey link that I put in the chat, all these questions are in that Google form. So don't forget, if you pull up that Google form, you can say, okay, great, I can fill that out later. For us here at Pedestrian Space to enjoy, the forms are anonymous. If you want to leave your name, you can, but they are anonymous and just help to enrich our knowledge from your diverse perspectives. But you can also leave answers to these questions in the chat for your fellow participants to enjoy. So what brings you here today? What is your relationship, background, and or interest in issues of urban or community agriculture? As I was planning for this session, I got some great messages from people around the world, farmers market manager in California, diverse people that, again, who've been working in this area for a long time. So I think it's really interesting to learn about what you all are doing. I'm not going to be reading the chat while I'm presenting live, but I will be saving that chat history. And also, if you would like to connect after this session is over, I will be providing my contact information. So I will allow just a small quiet moment. If anybody wants to drop in the chat, why are you here today? What inspired you to join this session? So this session was titled Walkability and Community Agriculture. So I'm going to jump right into the walkability aspect first and circle back to 2020, just a little bit before I connected with the Schumacher Institute. I established Pedestrian Space. I established it first simply as an Instagram account. It was the beginning of the pandemic, as we all recall, or some might like to forget. And I was living in Sweden, which quite infamously was not locked down. However, we were feeling the effects of the pandemic and impacts on space and movement and city life. And this is when I really realized, oh, walkability. It was a light bulb moment that walkability was sort of the glue that connected so many of my interests and my values and so forth. So I started this account to begin to explore issues and kind of to get the lay of the land. Who's working with walkability? Who's researching issues? Who are the advocacy groups? What's happening? And so that was yeah, a little over 4 years ago. And of course, the at the heart of pedestrian space, with it being a walkability focused account and mission, is supporting and playing an active role in the sustainable mobility shift. Some of you may have seen these mobility pyramids. But if not, there's many online. You could just search for mobility pyramid. And of course, with the sustainable mobility shift, we're seeing that reprioritizing people moving by foot, reprioritizing cycling, micromobility, public transport, and so forth. So at Pedestrian Space, from the very early days, I was very interested in approaching walkability from a holistic lens, which for me means thinking about walkability from the perspective of all people. I'm not only interested in how women move or how men move or children or elderly or disabled, but I really want to shape my understanding with a holistic lens, which of course requires a commitment to ongoing learning, right? So I snapped this picture in the city I was living at the time in central Sweden, Örebro. I really like this picture because it shows three different types of pedestrians. These are people, three different types of pedestrians with different needs. We have a woman with a like a rolling walker, somebody with a dog, and somebody with a stroller. So really having this holistic lens and being open to ongoing learning about different pedestrian needs. Sometimes people ask, well, walkability, are you only talking about people on foot? That's not fair. What about people in wheelchairs, this or that? And I have to really point out walkability, at least from my perspective and our work at Pedestrian Space, is also inclusive of people rolling and using diverse mobility support equipment. And we also frame walkability as a right, not a privilege. However, many of us know, some of you who maybe are familiar with issues of walkability, or if you start to think about your communities, oftentimes in many places, walkability is in fact sort of a hallmark of a privileged community in a lot of marginalized situations. However, at Pedestrian Space, we really are framing it as a right, and it should not be a privilege. again, focusing on mobility for all people. And public transportation. This is a huge dimension of a truly walkable city, because of course when we're getting to scale, we're not thinking of everybody moving by foot across, kilometers upon kilometers. So access to reliable, safe, and affordable public transportation is a vital dimension of a walkable community. So here's the watering can. Time for engagement. I was This is a photo from a public transportation conference in Poland that I was invited to speak at last year on public transportation and social exclusion. So I'm not going to go deep into that, but the issue of when people who cannot drive or who do not want to drive are also in communities where there's a lack of public transportation, how they are socially excluded, be it from career opportunities, social life, connectivity, and so forth. So I gave a speech at this session, and as I often do in my workshops and so forth, I preface it with asking, instead of "How are you doing today?" "How are you moving today?" So if you want to engage in the chat, you can. If you've been out and about today, how did you get around your community? And perhaps some of you drove, and let's not have, we're not going to be shaming here, car shaming. I'm in a car sometimes, although I am promoting walkability. We understand that many people are also using cars who would prefer to be moving in other ways, or are using public transportation and wish they could be cycling and so forth. So it's always interesting to hear people's perspectives on how, if they could, if they're not in their ideal mobility situation, how would they change it? So feel free to drop that in the chat. Do you dream of a subway system in your community? It might not be realistic. And then some people make decisions on where they live based on those mobility factors. So in a nutshell, that was pedestrian space, my work there, my approach to walkability, working at the intersection of media, research, advocacy, and public engagement to shape awareness and education on the benefits of walkability. You can visit pedestrianspace.org. After Instagram, a year later, I had to move it to a website to contain all the material flowing. And then I am also now a PhD student here in Warsaw at the Institute of Geography and Spatial Organization. And just briefly referring to this, my dissertation topic, walkable urbanism as a quality of life component in the 15-minute city concept. May be interesting for some of you who are in the UK, where it became a very controversial term. I know, the 15-minute city, but this is my research where we're looking at the 15-minute city as not an imaginary, not a new thing, but sort of very well packaged, repackaged, rebranding of what is essentially the DNA of good urbanism, and finding it manifest at the neighborhood level in diverse neighborhoods in Warsaw, and sort of studying that to see what was done right here, and then also seeing the barriers, and also really framing it within the lens of equity. And so uh, for my work with walkability and the 15-minute city, and now also increasingly issues of urban agriculture, I view the city as a laboratory. But as we all know, it's not just a laboratory, it's our life for those of us that live in urban or suburban environments. So I have the research perspective, but I'm also inhabiting it. If you follow any of my media, you see me storytelling all the time. And again, that's really what I wanted to bring here today, was that storytelling approach, because I feel like that's one of the most interesting ways to engage with diverse groups of people. Last year, I designed and facilitated 20 plus workshops and walking labs around issues of urban mobility. And one thing I'm really excited about and very grateful for to have this space today is that I'm really at the foundation stages of engaging with the topic of community agriculture. But what I envision for the future will be these types of engagements and workshops. So again, always looking forward to being able to engage with people who are doing such things. So I want to take one moment here for an engagement. Think about, how does mobility emerge as a value in your life? This is something we talk about in my mobility workshops a lot, which have a very strong psychological dimension. So how does mobility emerge as a value in your life? Has it defined, for example, where you chose to rent or buy a home, the ability to have access to public transportation, or the ability to cycle from your home to the heart of the city? So I'm going to allow a quiet moment for a reflection on that. Okay, now pivoting to the reason maybe why some of you particularly are here today. How does this all relate to food and community agriculture? Another engagement um, piece here, as you all know, we don't you don't have opportunity to write all of these answers in depth right now live. So please feel free to bookmark that form and come back to that. But do you have insights or stories to share on issues of walkability and community agriculture? So while I was working, my first few years with this topic of walkability, there was always this sort of nagging question in the back of my mind because I've had this ongoing interest in food in cities too. How does walkability connect up with food? I had a young man contact me from Wisconsin, I believe, and he said, I have a urban farm collective here, but we're in a food desert. And not only that, it's really unwalkable. And then that's when the light bulb went off. And I said, how can I forget this? I'm from the USA. Sadly, we have a terrible, terrible problem with food deserts in the USA. And I know they're present in the UK as well and other places. So that's one manifestation, of course, of a negative aspect of walkability and access to food, but there's others. So again, coming here today, being able to learn from insights people are dropping into the chat, and I think this could be a good question for us to come to back to during the discussion. And here we are back in 2020. And I wanted to refer to this because this moment during the pandemic was sort of a seminal moment for my own understanding of how I want to work with food in cities. So this was a grocery store in Sweden, and I recall that and we lived in the heart of the city. This was a store that probably supplied, I don't know how, 5 blocks out each way. All right. If you live in a city, you've got your local grocer that you go to. And we were not hit terribly by supply chain disruption, but I was seeing the news and I was seeing in places panic buying, supply chain disruption. And I remember going to our grocery store. This is how they did physical distancing in this place. Uh, and I remember going to the grocery store and thinking, what if we did have a disruption? How long would this supply last? All of us in this city, like the vast majority of people, are not growing anything. We're all dependent on these little grocery stores. So what would happen in a moment of crisis? And also what is happening in other places where there is panic buying, where there is rationing, where there is supply chain disruption. So this is also an engagement question. What happened in your community during the pandemic? Was there an access disruption of access to food? Was there supply chain disruption and an impact on food supply or other supplies? And if so, how? I think this also could be a great question to circle back to during the discussion time. So very briefly, also still in Sweden, we are. This was around the same time too that my cousin gave me this bulb of garlic from her allotment garden. Some of the best garlic I've had in my life, grown in the soils of an allotment garden in the Stockholm region. And I remember thinking, wow, you go into the grocery store, at an average mainstream grocery store in Sweden, and 90% of the garlic is exported from very far away. And you then have locally grown garlic, and it just seems bizarre. This over reliance on exports with high food miles and unsustainable production, while we know that often the same products can grow beautifully locally. So bringing in these questions of local food sovereignty and identity as well. So also being that this time during the pandemic, I think was one of the strongest seeds set in my mind for the work that I want to do with food in cities is connecting issues of community agriculture to resilience. I'm probably leaving some things off here, but as we know, so pandemic, obviously war, climate change, how that's disrupting food supply and crops, supply chain disruption is one of the scariest ones to me in my book because so many of us, so many people in general, are dependent on grocery stores for 100% of their food needs and other crises that could affect food supply and render communities very vulnerable. So we're pivoting here out of the pandemic now to current day Warsaw. Welcome to my balcony. Sorry for the mess. I decided to begin where I am. We are renting, first of all, and I want to say this is a very experimental and non-attached approach to gardening. I've been holding off on beginning a garden because of moving, and I don't want to get so attached to all my plants and invest all this time. But I realize we have this gorgeous, massive balcony. This is only half of it, and we have two of these. I realize I just need to start. So I began this garden with the idea that it's a test bed for me to grow, to begin growing, simply begin growing. I had never grown vegetables before this year, only herbs. So it's a private educational space for me personally, for my family, and a test bed for learning how to grow different things. The home garden for me also functions with learning about my own relationship with different plants. I grew peas for the first time this year. This was one of them. And for me, learning, and for those of you who are gardeners, I think you'll relate to this, learning that you do have different relationships with different plants and different plants awaken different things in you. Learning this for myself, I realized, okay, this is what I can bring. What can I bring to the community scale? I'm a community minded person starting in this micro home space and recognizing, oh, peas awaken a great excitement in me. This is a plant I can use when I do school gardening with children, probably, because I can convey a joy of gardening through this plant in particular. So, also inhabiting the joy of gardening, understanding the labor of gardening, and of course, the joy of plucking that pod and eating it right there in the garden, which I have a feeling several of you know this joy. We didn't have many peas that made it to the kitchen. The joy and triumph of seeing your own children try vegetables straight from the garden. I'm absolutely nuts about vegetables. My children are not. So to see my daughter eat a carrot directly from the garden, again, I have a feeling some of you here will relate to this, and then continue to ask for homegrown carrots was for me just a massive win. Again, as an urban researcher myself and a community advocate, doing this on the micro scale and thinking, okay, this is what I want to bring to the community scale. This is where I want to join in other people doing this type of work and contribute to this. I am also a photographer, and this is from a very past chapter of my life where I was doing a lot of food photography, specifically with chefs who do plant-based. Would you believe it? All of these dishes here are vegan and raw and designed with a gourmet mindset. So I just put that in there because the visual aspect for the media is very important for me, and it also connects to my whole mission of this plant forward knowledge, which of course connects to gardening and gardening education. And circling back to our garden, I learned this year for the first time you can cook with carrot tops. Has anybody here cooked with carrot tops? If you have, please drop it in the chat. I had no idea. I saw these wonderful bushy tops growing, and I thought, huh, I wonder if you could do anything with those. I began looking around. I made carrot tops chimichurri. It's a huge hit in our house. Black bean soup with carrot tops and potato parsley soup with carrot tops, all in 1 week. So for me, this is part of the plant forward learning that I'm talking about, the food literacy, connecting it to gardening, connecting it to kitchen literacy and nutrition. So I'm very excited about carrot tops as well. and think in a school garden or a community garden, what you can do. Those of you who garden know you'll see those carrot tops bushy for a while before you harvest. So knowing that you can use those and use them in really delicious ways. I also grew corn this year on my balcony garden. I'm very excited. um, Hand pollinated. I'll let you get a close up of that. I was very proud of myself. And I need more land. Yes, I do need land because I want to grow more corn. So I view the home garden as an important building block in the network of urban agriculture. The knowledge and passion that home gardeners can bring, I think, to the community scale is really critical. Are you a home gardener? Anybody here, please feel free to put in the chat. What are you growing? If you have accounts, even some people have accounts for their home gardens, which I think is great. They're sharing knowledge. They're in the whole media ecosystem, connecting with other gardeners. Or if you have favorite gardeners with media accounts, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And I also do think it is really important now that I'm entering this arena of community agriculture to tap home gardeners who are passionate and very experienced. I'm just beginning to develop my experience this year, and I definitely look forward to connecting with home gardeners who have a lot of experience. Those are the people I believe who can help, lead the community gardening movements. They do in many cases, and bringing that passion to people who haven't had that awakened quite yet. And while I aspire to actually one day be growing most of my family's vegetables, of course, I love to support organic farmers and gardeners. So this is at a Bio Bazaar in Warsaw. Unfortunately, not walkable. I would not say I have great walkable access to farmers markets, although they exist. It's a big city. Um, so that is something I know that activists are working on within this particular city, having more walkable access, including efficient public transportation to organic local food markets, also affordable, because as we know, I've lived in communities where there's organic farmers markets in America, for example, but they're not affordable. They're organic and they're great, and the produce is amazing, but it's definitely higher priced. And I've also lived in communities where there was farmers markets with organic local produce that was affordable and was accessible for all incomes. So moving out of the micro scale of my little test bed on my balcony to now the more macro scale and my vision for entering this work and bringing it into the wheelhouse at Pedestrian Space. What we're looking at Pedestrian Space is urban and community agriculture, including but not limited to everything mentioned here: home gardens, allotment gardens, school gardens, community gardens, hospital rooftop gardens, and urban farms. And also looking at issues of food access, including lack of access. Food deserts are probably one of the most critical issues here. Food sovereignty, there's so much interesting work going on with food sovereignty across the world. And local healthy food systems, food literacy, which really excites me to get involved with, community garden, how this all connects with urban resilience and well-being. And I think we can spend an entire session simply talking about terms such as food security, food sovereignty, access, food justice, how they all differ, what they mean. I'm not going to do that, but I will highlight this one quote I saw online about food sovereignty being a precondition to genuine food security. I've also begun my own literature review, and I do want to recommend this book. Please also feel free to drop in the chat if you have books on community urban agriculture that you recommend. Uh, this book, Public Produce, The New Urban Agriculture. If anybody's read it, please feel free to drop in the chat that you've read it. But I do very much recommend this book, which is making the case for really municipalities to steer the direction and to use urban governance as the tool to really shape food policy and use public space, the incredible resources that we have in public space, to devote it to growing food. I'm just finishing up this book. It's fantastic. And what I find interesting, this is happening currently in the US. There has been, I don't know how many, I believe it's about 12 maybe, offices of urban agriculture established and more coming. I could have that number a little bit off. Um, but there is my question, is there a renaissance of urban agriculture occurring in the USA? Because you have this movement of these offices of urban agriculture being established, which I think is really pivotal, that now there's municipal staff and resources devoted to offices of urban agriculture, many of them which are working to support diverse local initiatives and people, who are starting small urban agriculture initiatives all across the city. What I find fascinating is going back to the book, Public Produce, which was published in 2009. He states basically he hopes that in 20 years, such a book as this does not need to exist, because by this time we will have already implemented a variety of strategies to produce food throughout the city. So I think that's fascinating when a person publishes a book proposing an idea saying, I hope this idea doesn't even need to be presented in 20 years. And here we are, not quite 20 years later, but we have, at least in the States, this movement of offices of urban agriculture developing. You can, of course, look that up and see a lot of really interesting things going on there. I will skip over this. Just yesterday, I attended this session organized by the Alliance for Healthier Generation, Nourishing Futures and Exploration of Urban Agriculture, which included a presentation by a woman who devoted her doctoral studies to case studies of urban farms in the States. And then there was a panel talk. And for me, what was really fascinating, especially on the eve of delivering this presentation, was that during the panel talk, which included several urban farmers as well as experts, media was highlighted as the critical piece in order to engage the public on the existence of diverse urban agricultural projects. And that was really exciting to me because at Pedestrian Space, one of my mantras is that media is the action. So while we are engaged on the ground uh, in diverse local projects, media is one of our main activities, because not only do we need that physical and spatial changes to space for the quality of life and for the changes we need the change in consciousness, we need the change in awareness, in education and public engagement. And as we know, media is a very powerful tool, for better or for worse, but to use that for better and to use media to help inspire people, engage people, and educate people on how food can be grown in cities, and what are the benefits and what are the challenges, and how we can support diverse urban agricultural initiatives. I have a funny little story here. Please bear with me. These are not my nails. I was shopping, I was looking for a gift for my husband. I ended up in a salon and I noticed the woman working there had these gorgeous nails. So I said, wow, what beautiful nails you have. So she told me about where she got them done and so forth. And I told her, no, it's hopeless. There's no way I can get my nails done. I showed her pictures of myself and my corn plants at the time. And the two young women working in the salon, I tell you, their response was just completely blown away. I would never have guessed that they would be they were so curious. What are you doing? Where is this? Like, why are you growing these things? Like, how interesting. And I walked away from that thinking, okay, if I had a community garden, I would have instantly given them the information and said, come by for a community garden party or whatnot. Due to these nails, I don't think these young women would be necessarily getting busy in the dirt. But I really thought about, how do I engage these types of people who are clearly interested, but I'm not expecting them to come volunteer and be digging out carrots with their bare hands. But how do I get people like this involved they were clearly interested? So later, I was speaking with an international gardening sort of educator, and they also said, yeah, this is a really interesting point. How do we get those people involved who are not your typical catch for a community garden project? How do we inspire interest in the community gardens and then also make space for them when they arrive, so they don't feel, oh, there's nothing here for me, I'm worthless, I can't do the gardening work, I'm just going to leave. So providing opportunities creative opportunities, maybe take some pictures for, a garden Instagram account, do small video, help watch the kids so adults, can do the work they came to do when the kids maybe get bored and run off, help bag veggies, help maintain the community list. So I'm sure some people already working with community agriculture have answers for this. How do we get not just the nail gals, but different types of people who are not your traditional catch involved so that we can really, push momentum and bring in people that are not, your usual suspects. Um, Here again, this is a question that's in the form, and I think this will also be good for the discussion time. Obviously, we're really interested, and this is where my research mind and activity is going to come in, challenges for urban governance and mitigation to support urban agriculture. So I'll just whiz through these. There is skepticism among people about the agricultural capacity of cities. Obviously, financial constraints are a huge one. Polluted urban environments at times, polluted soils, food deserts, inequitable walkable access to food, connecting to food deserts, marginalized access to diverse community agriculture projects. One interesting thing I'm starting to find in different places is people who work with such projects often reporting, it's becoming sometimes an activity of the privileged. So people who need to work, a couple jobs and have long commutes, they don't have time to do gardening, as a hobby. They don't have time to volunteer. So in some places, it's sort of being seen as a hobby of the privileged. So how do we provide more equitable access to such projects and welcome people? So it's not something for well-to-do, gardening should be one of our most democratic activities. Also, lack of community interest, obviously, in some places. And again, the equity aspect, community garden projects being a benefit for select communities. I'm coming to the end here, but another action piece for myself this year. I'm very excited to, in the future, do school garden workshops. So I did a little pilot at one of my own children's school. This was age 4 to 6. I had printed up some pictures from my own garden, the plants, my daughter trying a pea for the first time, a homegrown pea, laminated it, and then set the space to engage with these children about, just sitting down to first start to talk about what is gardening, who's gardening in your family, do you dream about gardening, what would you grow, and then going towards a creative activity. Of course, this was 4 to 6 year olds, so tailored to their age group. But I'm really interested in learning more about diverse school gardening programs and according to age range too. And then, of course, we went outside also, and the teachers had came prepared with some seeds as well as some plants to plant. Um, so that's I would say, an on the ground action activity, connecting it to my research. I am currently living in Poland, which is part of the Visegrad region, which is 4 countries with a shared culture, history, background. That is Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. And so I'm looking regionally also, since I'm here and present, and these are the places that are easiest for me to get to in person, to learn from what are they doing? What are some great examples? What are some best practices? And one of these in Hungary, as well as the Czech Republic, is their school garden network. And would you believe it? They have school gardens embedded in the national curriculum. What this means is that school gardens are completely mainstream. They're not special. They're not for privileged private schools, or certain politically minded types of schools. School gardens are in the national curriculum. They are widespread across many and diverse schools. There are so many. So I will be in Hungary later this year, later this summer. So I'm looking forward to hopefully visiting a few. And I find this really exciting. How do we mainstream school gardens? Well, there's an example right there that I believe is also in the Czech Republic, embedding it in the national curriculum. Another example of something I look to is urban resources, urban municipal resources for engaging and informing people. This one is fascinating because it's in English, but it's by the Municipal Greenery Authority of Krakow. Maybe some of you have been to beautiful Krakow in Poland. They have on their website, if anybody needs a link, I can provide it later in the chat. Become an urban gardener. I really find this so interesting because it's also in English. I think they have it in Polish too. So does your community, do you know if your community, your town or city online has media or resources for engaging and informing people on how to become an urban gardener, how to, first of all, grow things at home, tips, but also how to get engaged locally? And so building on my research, also I'm launching my first garden research visits. I've already launched that with a visit to this particular garden. It's attached to gorgeous, huge old building, which is right here, one of the first cultural centers in Warsaw, one of the oldest. And they have this fantastic community garden there. This is clear across the city for me, many, many districts away. But it does play a role in my research asking, do you have a community garden in walking or reasonable public transit commuting distance from you? Again, this question is on the survey form as well. So with my future activities, these are things I'm really interested in getting involved with and amplifying. Again, I have my contact info at the end. If you're interested in collaboration, please feel free to reach out. My big vision actually is a multidisciplinary center for urban agriculture and university and community partnerships. So stay tuned. There's my information. If you would like to email me, visit pedestrianspace.org. My little balcony garden has an Instagram page now too. Please feel free to visit. And coming up next, I'm really excited to turn over the floor to Yuji. Yuji is a master student in the film and TV school at the School of Arts at University of Bristol. She did her industrial placement or is doing, she's wrapping up her industrial placement with me at Pedestrian Space. And her focus has been on community and organic gardening. I have loved being able to mentor and work with Yuji. And if you see this picture here, we have been meeting once weekly since May. And during that time, she's not only been doing her industrial placement and producing media, but also becoming an active volunteer in Bristol community gardens, and every week showing me little harvests. So one week it'll be potatoes, one week apples, one week blackberries. It's been a true joy to know her and to observe her development through the industrial placement. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Yushi.
So it's okay to show my own screen, but it shows like the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay. Okay, I fixed it. You should share. You should be able to share now.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay, here's my PowerPoint. And so, hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so nervous. It's my honor to be here to share my experience. Today, I want to show my experience volunteering at Eastern Community Garden. Here is my contents. I want to focus on 4 parts: introduction, my experience in Eastern Community Garden, and the public thoughts and discussion of the problem nowadays. Well, the first part is introduction. During my industrial placement, I am to explore how media influence public awareness and engagement in organic food. During my volunteer work at Eastern Community Garden, I will do watering, weeding, plating, and recording videos every week. Well, the introduction of the Eastern Community Garden is space located in a beautiful, quiet corner of Eastern in Bristol. People who work at the Eastern Community Garden encourage wildlife and use natural growing methods. Besides, Eastern Garden is open to anyone who would like to grow vegetables, fruits, and herbs. Here are the maps printed by Gavin. Well, the working day starts at 11 a.m. and they show the harvest at about 2 p.m. Every Sunday. But when it is light and warm, they may stay on for a while longer if they can. Each person can stay as long or as little as people like. Well, I I first came to this farm in mid-June for the Get Grow Well Show project held in Bristol. As a photographer, I visited Pharaoh's farms to take pictures. When I arrived at the Eastern Community Garden, I was deeply moved by the exaggeration of the frontiers. So I decided to come here every week. Now I have participated in 6 weeks of activities. I remembered that during the first week, I didn't bring any food, but it was already lunchtime. Lowe's pulled me aside and said, "No problem, we can share what we brought." So Catherine showed her um, homemade kiwi pancake, which were very delicious. And she emphasized the ingredients to consider any allergies for me. In the second week, they gave me many interesting walks. As we can see the picture PowerPoint. So here is the pancake. It's really delicious. So the second week, I have walked to grow up the sunflowers, as we can see the first picture. And I feel very pumped when I put them into a soil. Later, I drew potatoes with a little boy in the field, which was my first experience of searching for potatoes in the soil. And I found it very interesting. And in the night, I just cooked the potatoes for my document. They say like it's really delicious because it's made by natural and it's organic food. So the next week, we start to planting lettuce. Having never tried planting anything myself, they just taught me step by step. By the fifth week, the lettuce had grown tall enough to be harvested. In the first week, I tried cutting a lot of lavender and took it home. As we can see the picture at the week 3, I just cut up the beans, and in light, I just cooked a bean soup, and I just share with my friends. And in the week 4, I just cut off a lot of lavender, and I just make a bunch of flowers when I just go back home. In the week 5, we have the apples harvest. So I just pick many of apples and I just bring home. It's really sweet. And I think it's really interesting. So I have make a short interview which about the public thoughts about organic food. So I just asked, what do you think about organic food and how to encourage people to buy organic food?
I love organic food. I think I would love the idea to always have organic food, but it's expensive. That's the main thing I I'm very scared of something organic. I think if we're gonna look at it, I think like it's not better. Yeah, it's just expensive.
Yeah, I agree. It's expensive. Do you think like the most public, like they don't actually know the organic food? They just prefer to buy the original food.
Yeah.
What do you think about like to encourage people to buy more organic food because it's expensive?
There's anything you can do to encourage. It's just the efficacy of the product is the only thing that would, if it's the only thing available, that's all people would buy, isn't it? But it isn't. So people are either swayed on cost or ethics.
Okay, after we watch these videos, we can find like the public thinks like the organic food is expensive, but they love because it's healthy. And I think the people think it's ethics for people to buy organic food or not buy organic food. So here's a discussion about the problems every garden in Bristol maybe faces. Well, I just joined the WhatsApp of the Eastern Community Garden, but one of the frontier from Eastern Community Garden said like, because the Lanka frontier, she want to give up to be a frontier anymore because she thinks that no more people to help her, and she found is no paid work. So based on this, it's a problem they face at the Lanka frontier nowadays. And no paid work, like many people want to be a frontier to maybe grow some organic food anymore, and it's too much work for them just when they every day or every time. So here is the problem I face. I'm so sad she want to give up, but I don't know how to do. I just want to maybe make more videos to introduce everyone to know about the Eastern Community Garden, to encourage people to be a frontier nowadays, to join the community garden. That's all for today's sharing. That's all. Thank you.
Yuji, I wonder if we could watch one of the videos too
Yeah,
to end it. Do you want me to pull it up, or do you
Yeah,
have it?
it's okay. I just start sharing. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, we're just gonna watch one of Yuji's videos. Let me pull it up here. And then I guess go to discussion. Give me 1 second. Okay. Which one, Yuji? The first or the second one? Okay, 1 second. So this is Yuji's second production. Everybody can see. Full screen. Okay. So, oops. I'm sorry. 1 second. That should not be playing. Oh dear. Hold.
Hi, are you okay? You've gone to mute at the moment. Yeah. You're on mute, Anika.
Oh, good. You don't hear the music anymore?
No.
Sorry, I'm trying to close that out. Well, I'm going to go to mute and try to close that out real quick. I'll be right back. Okay. I lost track of the window and couldn't close it out. Okay, so I think Yuji, thank you. I've been Yuji's industrial placement is almost over, but it's been really, that was the second video she produced during her industrial placement. What I love is that not only is she a film and TV student who is producing media through her placement, but she's also volunteering. She's getting engaged in the local scene, and for me, that is what excites me at Pedestrian Space too, is that intersection of producing media, getting your hands dirty, engaging with the local community, communicating with people about what you're doing. And so I really love what she's doing. I can only hope to have future placements like you, Yuji, and I think it's really great. Yuji, I have to also mention, has a background too. She did her bachelor's in China and was doing advocacy around organic food there also. So I really look forward to following along with what Yuji does in the future as well. So shall we open it up to discussion, Ian?
Yeah, that sounds good. Anybody here have got any questions and comments that they'd like to start with? I think you've posed quite a lot of questions to us along the way, and it's obviously quite a challenging area in some respects to sort of get that momentum going with community gardening. I wonder if there's any sort of thoughts around, how do you initiate these things, and probably more importantly, how do you keep momentum going? Yeah.
Should we use hands as well?
Richard.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I found myself thinking of obviously my own specific location, which is always a good place to start because you've got the local knowledge. And I think that's actually quite an important point, having the local knowledge of, the movers and shakers and if you like, the community nodes of action. But actually, within that, you mentioned the idea of a living laboratory, which I think is an idea that's got legs, it's got real potential. And in that regard, it's a question for me of what are the models that work, and in that sense, not just community agriculture as a sort of isolated entity, but you've already joined the connection with transport, but then there's energy and water and well-being and all of those good things. So if we start to see the connections and the positive reinforcements of all of these aspects, which we need, and then we can create a rather comprehensive picture. And one of my comments is, I wonder if we were to look through our new Labour government's manifesto, what hooks we would find onto which these ideas would very naturally sit. And thereby, especially with things like, just to pick up on the energy, GB Energy was launched today, and there was a very specific thing to do with community energy. Well, why not in the same breath say, oh, great idea about your community energy projects, but did you realize the connection with all these other things at a community level that could add significant value? So it'd be really interesting to set the systemic context and then the policy hooks, and then push it on that basis. That's just a comment, really.
That's where I really look forward to, and why I'm here today, why I wanted to just dive in and start. Is to start connecting with people who some people might have that more policy hook knowledge, or issue about resources and water. Those are probably areas I'm not going to develop huge. It's not my area, but I'm always interested in connecting with others so that, yeah, we can be sitting at the table and have that knowledge all building.
Yeah. One thought that occurred to me was, how do you sort of cope with seasonality in community agriculture? The fact that, you show some lovely pictures of picking stuff and eating it, but that tends to be sort of late summer, autumn in many cases. What does that community agriculture look like in the depths of February when the snow's on the ground? Yeah.
I suppose it would also depend on the location. And this has me thinking I need to return to climate zones and areas where I can grow year round. I mean, I've lived on the Big Island where there's a thriving farmers, market scene all year round. Obviously, it's a volcanic tropical island. But yeah, here in Poland, I already see my little garden going to sleep for 6+ months of the year, and I think that would make for a really interesting video production too. Community gardens, that seasonality. What do they do then in the winter life cycle for those places that have winter? But if it's okay, there's somebody here that I believe it's Carrie who reached out to me on Instagram, and I think this would be a great question for you. So you're in California, right?
Yes, but we grow year round
You grow
because we're
year
in California.
right.
But the community garden out in because I'm the farmers market manager out in Palm Springs, and so it's triple digits right now for the summer. So everything's getting moved indoors.
Right. Yeah. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? The effects of climate change and increasingly extreme weather events. But the other thought for me is that there's a sort of connection in with the food security issues, and sense that if you start producing a lot of stuff, there's a whole study around preservation of food and how we keep it and build stocks up that could connect into this as well. So all of the old ideas about preserving foods in different ways without sticking them in fridges could be an important aspect to link into community agriculture as well. Just some thoughts there occurring to me. Elvira.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for the presentations. They were really beautiful. And I couldn't help but thinking, I haven't spent too much time in community gardens myself, but from the bits I've seen, they're really beautiful as like these first instances where people start growing their peas or, collect some apples and like, wow, that's really important and really inspiring. But I haven't really seen community gardens where there's actual like masses of food produced. And obviously I'm not talking like big monocultures, but like, something that actually can produce a substantial amount of food. And I was wondering if any of you really who are here today have experiences with community gardens that do produce like good amounts, where people can actually be fed with, and what would that look like? Because I think that it's really lovely to show people how to grow a little bit of crops, but it's quite a far cry from like what it actually means to produce food. And so I would be really interested in like how these two can be combined in a community sort of way.
Yeah, any thoughts on that, Annie? Because it's coming in a question there, maybe a scale of this as well, which is an interesting aspect. Yeah.
I see Richard has raised his hand, but briefly in my sort of networking now, very early on in my networking, I am seeing, and that's a really great question. And I think that's about the skepticism piece, which I do run into a lot. Can we produce enough food that like actually supplies? And I think there is a beauty in starting small. First of all, my balcony garden doesn't nearly, for example, provide, proper sustenance for my family. We're still buying most of our veggies. However, if we lived here for many years, we would design the heck out of that space. And I'm seeing examples actually of people who have balcony gardens and very small plots, who are they show their production by weight, and they're really producing so much food enough to share with family and friends. But of course, that takes time too, right? And commitment and staying in one place. But it is possible. It's not imaginary, and there's people that are really producing quite a quite a lot on improving that you can do it in small scale, as well as I think community farms. Some community farms are very much educational in purpose and sort of like exhibit farms, or just they're not really there to necessarily provide sustenance for the community, but to show, like, again, a test bed. Whereas I believe there are other community farms that have been specifically developed, and I'm thinking more also particularly in so-called marginalized communities, but also other communities where the purpose is actually to help supplement
The diet.
supplement family meals, families who have no local access at all whatsoever. If you've ever been to a food desert, it is absolutely devastating. The food options are horrific. And then I believe there's also a cultural piece here. I believe that to some degree in Europe and North America, there's a little more of the skepticism sometimes, interestingly. I might be wrong. Whereas I'm noticing in other places there's the idea of the kitchen garden is totally normal, so there might be some cultural issues to explore there too, about our own belief that we can really, actually grow food in cities, that um, maybe it's not 100% of our veggies and fruits, but that's more than sort of like a nice to have, but it's actually helping to supplement nutrition. Yeah, I believe in it.
Thanks.
I'll turn it over
Maybe
to Richard.
sorry,
Yes.
just to double up, I do believe in it as well, and I've seen
Right.
it happening as well.
Yeah,
Just I haven't seen it in urban settings, in
urban settings.
community gardens,
Right.
like.
And I
But
do
it
want to
would be-
share very briefly too, by urban, I'm very much thinking of the suburban context too. I'm growing corn. I mean, my goodness, I need space really to expand, and I believe why not? Why not use the suburban spaces that we might have? They're within reasonable commuting distance. We've got the space. Also thinking cost wise. If I set up my farmhouse collective, it's going to be probably outside the city or in a suburban area that people can commute to, so that we've got the space for some cornfields and to grow big pumpkins and so forth. So I think space and cost is a huge issue, and maybe why, we don't see it in cities as much.
Right.
But I'll turn it over to Richard.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The whole issue of quantifying or modeling the opportunities, I think, is really important. I come from the world of energy, and a lot of people get very excited about all sorts of weird energy technologies, but then you actually go away and do some of the numbers, and you think, yeah, right, nice idea, but it's not going to really touch the sides in terms of the need we have. However, when it comes to food, quite literally, if you have community agriculture centers going, they can act as seed points. Should things start to go terribly wrong, at least you'll have a certain amount of expertise and starting points for actually extending the growing areas out. But that also means you've got to start thinking about, well, what is our plan B? Should we need to start growing things out a bit more? Could we rapidly extend our growing opportunities? Because guess what? Maybe there might be more people interested in growing stuff if the food starts to become a little bit more scarce. And also, I just want to come back to the multiple value thing. Yes, there's a value of fresh food, etc., but also in things like well-being. One of, in fact, our newly elected member of parliament, he got an MBE specifically because he developed the whole community prescribing thing. It was a bit of a leader in that. And guess what they do? Quite a lot is to do with growing stuff. So if we start to join things up, what may not necessarily be terribly attractive in terms of, beating the Sainsbury's, Tesco's and what have you of the world, because they'll always do it on price. You start to add these other layers of value, which I think start to make a lot of sense. Oh, and by the way, when I'm talking about the large supermarkets, and again, referring back to the energy thing, guess where we get some of our ideas about whether renewable energy maybe not quite so good, the influences of the world, and just ask yourself where the skepticism is actually coming from, because they're quite subtle in how they influence people. So not being too conspiratorial, but wouldn't it be great to work with the supermarkets in terms of getting the whole thing going, rather than them sniping rather sneakily from the sidelines, if that's indeed what they're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, good. Right.
I'd be really curious if anybody wants to share what was going on during the pandemic. If any of you had your own personal insights about food in cities during the pandemic, or also what was going on locally with food. Anything of note?
Well, there were a lot more people working in gardens. That's what I can say, because as I've made a comment, there were an awful lot of very nicely tended gardens, because people had the time and indeed possibly the inclination to do it. And it was also as a way of getting out into the fresh air. So there were a number of drivers encouraging people to go and look after that vegetable plot they really don't look after most of the time. So yeah, that kind of thing. And also when it came to things like community relationships in getting food, we had a lot of things like street wardens who went around getting food from supermarkets for people who couldn't get there for various health reasons or mobility reasons. So there was a certain element of the need for food generating community cohesion in that extreme situation.
When did they end the street wardens?
Ooh. There was
Say again?
Yeah, there was quite a lot of volunteering going on around the pandemic time. Lots sprang up spontaneously in many communities of people who just took it on themselves to organize to look after people who were having difficulties, and really just to sort of be there for anybody who needed help. And interesting in I live in a village, which is obviously not a city, but villages are full of gardeners around here. But there was a substantial amount of increased interest in local food. We know that we have suppliers in the local farms who provide into the local shops. But they saw their trade expand quite dramatically during the pandemic, which was useful to see. Some of it stuck, but now that it's all over, people have tended to go back a little bit to jumping in their SUVs and driving into the city to go to the supermarket, which is a characteristic of village life around here.
Yeah, and I understand that about village life, especially if it's not well connected up with it's hard to live a village life without a car if there's no public transportation, right? But about the street wardens, I think, oh, what a fascinating idea. What a fantastic idea to integrate into not just only in crisis time, but regularly. And I think there's probably groups that do that. And I'm also thinking now of something totally separate, but I've been looking at the issue in Singapore, which I don't know if any of you are familiar, but they have a whole, due to how much they rely on imports, how sizable their food consumption relied on imports. They had a program, I think it's called Singapore 2030, I'm not sure, where they're looking to have at least 30% of their food, produced locally, this whole pivot. So it's also a policy pivot in which the government has incentives for people who have green businesses that will be producing food in the city. So a lot of technology stuff going on around growing, vegetables in the city and different technology oriented things. But some of the, my leaning is more towards the social stuff. And I'm looking at some of the projects where they, for example, employ 70% plus people on the spectrum, for garden projects. And as a mom to somebody on the spectrum myself, and knowing this world of people who are not quite always integrating in society like others, having such projects too with the Richard, you brought up the well-being piece earlier too. For me, this is a big part of it, creating these spaces for people who might not be functioning in other ways. And really, I feel like this model is not unusual, actually. So I'm excited about that potential as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. The other thing that came to my mind is, oh, sorry.
I don't hear him. Just
No, I'm not on mute. I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Cuba. Yeah, Cuba grows an awful lot of food in all sorts of nooks and crannies in its towns. So they may be an interesting example of what they've been doing for years. Apparently, if you go to Havana, you'll find areas where you've got a demolished building, but yet that demolished building area is full of a community garden. They don't, there it is, growing stuff, and they don't have much oil. You see, that's the other thing that's maybe driving that.
Yeah. Super. Well, Anika, I think that that's been a fantastic journey through all this, and I hope you've got some useful ideas out of this. I'd love to see how this now develops, and as you said earlier, you feel you're maybe in the first stages of this. And I think expanding on what you've done and seeing the full integrated systemic issues that come out of it, I think is really fascinating. Where I think where we in the institute sit is trying to explore that and trying to see the connections, and certainly would endorse the idea that this is great for people's health, physical and mental and all kinds really, and working on those aspects of it is brilliant. So yeah, I would say a big thank you.
Yeah, and just a quick thought. I wonder whether we might have a crack at creating this slightly larger systemic framing as an offer.
Yeah,
just relatively simple, but the sort of stuff that you've been doing, the food, energy, waste world, there may be some causal loop diagrams that you can simply lift straight out and say, there you go, and that's where the community agriculture fits.
Yeah.
Do you think? Is there something already there, do you think?
I think there's it certainly did start to impact on that, because one of the issues that was coming out from the work on recycling waste, food waste in particular, was how could that feed into providing compost into an urban farming environment.
That's so interesting. Oh, that would be so interesting to talk about.
It would be, yeah. The real issue was getting a good clean compost that with food waste and all kinds of sewage waste is the contamination problems. So that if you could sort those out, you might find you've got a really good circular economy developing.
Right.
Really want to talk about, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, maybe there's a way forward too, and some joint research. Also, in my beginning garden research here, I'm asking sites, garden sites, and so forth, what is their compost philosophy?
Yeah.
The one I showed you with the dome, I went there and they took me to their compost area, and I was actually quite fascinated because their huge compost bin, the lid was up, and there were no bugs, which maybe is odd. Maybe that's not even good. I'm not sure, but it felt very organized, and I would have expected it was very interesting to me. It felt very clean and organized, but it was food waste. And then they also had very specific details about what you can't have in there.
Yeah.
So they had their whole compost philosophy, which I imagine is standard across gardens, but it's definitely interesting to learn how. And also in home gardening, I've been doing compost teas for my plants, where I just make a tea and then I cool the water and dilute it and spread it around. So everything I'm doing in my garden is experimental, but I want to also level up with experienced home gardeners and experienced community gardeners to see, can this scale up? Is this useful? Is this an efficient way to use the waste? Should I be also mulching the material after to really use it, or is the tea enough? These are some questions. And the issues of insects, and I'm on the I'm on an upper level of my building. I can only imagine the different issues I would have if I was on the ground level.
Yeah, exactly.
And somebody here, very briefly, somebody I talked to you know, I want to also include home gardens in my research, because this is an issue. And allotment gardens, somebody I know here in Warsaw said they gave up on their allotment garden. Allotment gardens are very big here, like I think they are in many other European cities. But he said that he gave up because boars were always coming through. So to me, this is also where urban governance can come in, because we don't necessarily want individuals handling a board. You know, how do individuals handle that? Can be quite scary, actually. So how do we handle that issue of animals and wildlife and so forth, with keeping these, protecting also our urban agriculture products? And Carrie, she didn't mention it, but she brought up, I think, a very sad issue, but then also where she was theft, in the chat. She brought that up. So there's so many issues to unpack, but Ian, I am very interested in the food waste issue. That's not an area I'm well
Yeah.
schooled.
Well, this was not small scale. It was taking the food waste collected from the whole city of Bristol and
Wow.
digesting
Yep.
it. Massive, huge plant out at Avonmouth here, and it's knowing what to do with the sort of digestate, as they call it, the solid stuff that comes out from that.
Is it well sorted?
Sorry?
Is it well sorted?
No, at that stage it is a compost. And it's very much a case of, you know, the food waste that gets collected produces a lot of methane gas, which they generate power from. But after processing all that, and it does go through quite a bit of heat treatment to make sure it's killed off all the bugs. But it's still full of contaminants, which make it difficult to use. So it's often used just as what's called landfill cover. So it's put on top of landfill so they can start growing grass on top of it. But even then, it's sort of fairly protected grass that you don't put animals on, so it doesn't get back into the food chain. But if they can improve the process and make it suitable, that's one of the things we wanted to see if they could do, was to make it so that they could then supply it to garden centres as a product. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an issue there. Again, it comes with transport, and that's logistics.
Yeah.
Moving stuff around is expensive and tricky.
Yeah.
And designing the infrastructure that deals with the collection from individual households and then taking them to some location for anaerobic digestion. At what scale is it going to be? Because is there an optimum scale? So there's actually some quite interesting design to be done on all of this. I happen to have worked on a project few years back to do with developing a new anaerobic digestion system that was actually aimed at places like Nigeria, where they have a lot of problems with cassava leaves, or cassava peeling, I should say. Cassava being a staple carbohydrate in sub-Saharan Africa. And they produce thousands of tons of this stuff. And it just sits there rotting on the ground and creates all sorts of problems. And so one of the kind of virtuous circles was to propose this anaerobic digestion technology, which would sit typically within a small agricultural settlement. So again, it comes back to the question of scale. And then you'd have to figure out how the distance you would have to move these things, so this waste material, and so on and so forth. So it becomes quite an interesting logistics plus economics plus sociology, because it's all to do with what do people do in this regard. How are they engaged as part of the employment picture in this new scenario where they haven't been using anaerobic digestion until now? But once you start to produce methane in remote rural settlements, you open up all sorts of other interesting opportunities. So there are all these sort of consequential, potential positive things, which once you've spotted the qualitative link, is then a question of what are the numbers? How does it quantify? Does it start to look sensible? Is there a business model behind it that actually is viable and in the current market or in a future market? Now that's the other thing, is things change. So it may not be viable right now, but maybe in 5 years' time, it could be, if things go on the way they're going. So it's that sort of modeling, which I think is quite interesting in this regard.
Yeah. Lovely. Thanks, Richard. Well, lots to think about.
I don't know how to raise my hand. I usually do. I don't know if it's because I'm a host, but I'm also curious with that, are there some existing models? And I know it could change what is needed depending on location, but are there some even just starting in Europe or anywhere in the world, are there some existing models of cities doing that efficiently or well?
Well, I don't know. Elvira's posted a link there, which may be something to look at. But yeah,
Yeah, hi, just to jump in. The link, as I said, is not for like super large scale, although it says like businesses as well. But it's a really cool composting system that you have to buy. But it's very sturdy and very fast paced as well. For things like community gardens and stuff, for like food waste, because obviously the problem with food waste is that you cannot just compost it like
no.
in the same way as you do with garden waste, because then you've got the rats and all the animals that can be problematic. So yeah, that's just something that we used to use, or we do use at Schumacher College, which is in Devon, and it's really handy. So that just came to my mind. I thought I might as well post.
Sounds like a lot of research there, Annika. Yeah, but it'd be interesting to sort of blend that into community aspects of whether that could be at a scale that does work, and you know, even if it's a smallish scale, it could be supplying quite a few different areas from one location, rather than the thing that they've done in Bristol is, you know, gone for the massiveness of it, or the sort of huge. There are literally 4 huge tanks full of this stuff, massive silos that are digesting away. Yeah.
But then I suppose you rely on fossil fuels again to collect them.
And yeah, it's all big collection system throughout the whole area. You know, trucks driving everywhere. Yeah.
Although, if just to interject, it's interesting that companies like Grundon, which is a big waste collection company, they are actually now using electric vehicles for normal domestic waste. I'm not sure about commercial waste, but yeah, so they are coming, and they're really useful because they can just creep around without making too much noise, and there's lots of stopping and starting, which is what the electric vehicles are quite good at.
And don't forget, we do have the Poo bus in Bristol, which is
oh yeah,
a gas bus, which is generated from the anaerobic digester methane. So, you know, there are ways of trying to sort of mitigate the problem of collection on fossil fuels. Yeah, so watch this space. It's all changing, isn't it? It's all moving, hopefully, in the right direction.
Hmm.
And Richard, what you put, I know we're like getting closer to wrapping up, it seems, but Richard, you also made a comment about how about having urban gardening integrated into community homes development along with, you know,
yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm thinking about that because well, last week I think it was, our new Labour government was saying basically no new houses are going to be built without solar on the roof, which is a kind of statement of bleeding obvious, frankly. You know, it costs, the marginal cost of putting PV on a roof when you're building the house is really nothing. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's very, very small. There are things like sustainable urban drainage, which again is something that they have to do now. So there are many layers of planning requirements. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't a specific planning requirement to say, let's enhance the local biodiversity and ecosystem through careful layout of the settlements to encourage wildlife corridors and, you know, open water spaces and all that kind of good stuff. I'm sure if you let an ecologist loose on a bit of town planning, not only would they come up with, well, actually, why don't you have more trees? Because it's really useful in summertime when things get hot. And I'm sure a lot of cities have realized that now. But also, well, okay, so where are all the bugs going to go, and how do they move, and what about the birds and the bats and the moths and all of that? So have that built into the infrastructure of a housing development.
Yeah,
it's obvious.
Make sure they're apple trees so you can eat the fruit.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean,
and it's obvious to us, but so that's why we're the people in an online session together having great talks about community agriculture, because it's obvious to us. But then my question is, why isn't it why is this an unusual idea, having urban gardening embedded into, you know, community homes, and then what is the future? Could it be that in 30 years, like, that would be weird to even be having the discussion because it's become so mainstream in some places? So
I think the answer is actually looking for the examples where it's going well already, and then saying, why shouldn't it go well somewhere else?
Exactly.
Oh, and by the way, that was backfitted into an existing urban settlement. When you've got a relatively clean slate, so to say, of a grey, what's it called? What's it called now? Not green belt, or grey belt, poor quality agricultural land. Actually, is there something? This is an idea that's been percolating in my head. If you go to an agricultural area, quite often they're fairly monocultural, and the actual biodiversity is not that wonderful. If you could imagine a situation where your settlement introduces a wide range of diverse habitats, more so than that was there originally, could you end up creating a little oasis of pollinators that then actually have a positive impact on the surrounding agricultural land? Now, that's an interesting hypothesis. I don't know if anybody has looked at that, but seems to me to be quite an interesting thing to do.
Wow. There's a lot.
I'm thinking of developments I've seen. I just don't have them in my mind, but this is the work I need to do, I think, is start listing it, using the space at pedestrian space to say, oh, here's a development in Arizona or wherever. I'm starting to remember diverse little pockets of development I've seen that are integrating things. I'll have to start compiling a list, because that is my approach, what you said, finding where it's happening and saying, look, they're doing it. They've been doing it for decades. Why don't we do it here? It's my approach with the 15-minute city, saying this is not new. Like, look at, we already have these places that embody this essence of this 15-minute city. It's not a new thing. So let's look at where it's worked because of common sense, decades of common sense urban planning. That's what it takes. So yeah, I'll be doing that. I'll work on that.
And if there could be some kind of taxonomy that enables you to say, I'm looking for something which looks a little bit like this settlement where I happen to live, who's out there in whatever part of the world where it's similar climate, similar kind of conurbation structure, whatever. And if you got half a dozen where you can say they've been doing it for 10 years and this is the result, you think, oh wow, okay, what's the common ground? What's the model? What's the underlying thing that they've discovered?
No.
Good.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Anika.
Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you, Yuji. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. And Yuji, if you want to post any of your work on our website, you're very welcome to do so. We'd love that. So thank you again, Anika, for putting this together and stimulating lots of thoughts. It's something we all get out there tomorrow and start digging the ground.
The soil of our minds. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Until next time.
All right. Farewell. Nice to see you guys. Bye-bye.
Have a good tea. Yep. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. So I will log out. You've got your recording?
I'm recording. I'll stop that now. It needs to process it then, and I'll post it on our YouTube, and I'll send you the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I copied the chat, but if you also can send it, that's fine. But I didn't know if you would say. Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much. That was so interesting. I hope to be able to circle back in some time and keep going.
Right.
Okay. Thanks, Ian.
Take care of yourself.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.